delivered, and then feel confident that they recognise that those policies with that implementation is going to change their lives for the better. We've got a government that's moved from levelling up to trickling down to free fall of the pound, doesn't really know which direction it's going in, and clearly is now going to have a very difficult time at its own party conference arguing amongst itself. So I think you adverted to the disputes that had taken place last year here at the Labour Party conference. I think they will pale into its significance with what is going to go on at the Conservative Party conference next week, because you've just had the IMF coming out and saying, look, the government's gone crazy. It's got its fiscal policy at odds with its monetary policy, and it really needs to sort this out. So I think what you'll see next week is those MPs, the majority of whom, as you recall, Tom, did not support Liz Truss. They actually supported Rishi Sunak.
Although he didn't quite get a majority of MPs.
No, absolutely, but a larger proportion than Liz Truss did. I think you'll find that they are pretty angry at the way in which all that reputation that they liked to assume they had about fiscal responsibility has now been chucked out of the window, and yet the people in this country are feeling real economic pain, and we're going to see mortgage rates going up, which is going to affect young voters in particular. You know, people starting out in life wanting to have their first home, who are then going to say, well, you know, we can't afford it any longer because the mortgage rate's gone up, or we can't afford to get a larger place. We wanted to start a family, but we can't. So I think those Conservative MPs next week are really going to feel that, and we're going to see real tensions at their party conference, which just have been totally absent here. Here, it's been positive, it's been dynamic, it's been the laying out of really solid policies, you know. So I think it's been a good week for us.
Well, let's bring in Tony Diver now. From a journalistic perspective here, the Labour Party seems very confident. Is it right to be?
Well, yeah, I think you're totally right. I mean, seeing yesterday through Keir Starmer's speech, there were, what, 6 standing ovations during that speech? The whole room did feel like they were behind the leader. And if we compare that to last year, during the leader's speech, there was heckling going on in the audience. You know, there was a sort of palpable sense of people disagreeing with each other out on the conference floor, you know, around the exhibition stands everywhere. It sort of felt slightly uneasy. I mean, looking at the polling, that big new polling in the Times yesterday, the Labour are well ahead of the Tories. And it does seem as if the election is now Labour's to lose rather than the way it seemed for the last 12 years, which is that they haven't really got a look in. So yeah, I do think there's been a real shift in the sense of mood, and that's basically because Liz Truss came to power. She risked it all on a big economic gamble, but a gamble where she basically said, look, we care about one thing and one thing only, and that's growth. And the response to that from the markets has been pretty horrendous. So you know, she set herself a very clear test, and the early signs, although they are early signs, it's only been a couple of weeks of government, are that she's wrong, and actually Labour is the party who's now got the support of the public on the economy.
Although I suppose we can look back to the early 1980s when, what was it, 400 economists wrote into the Times newspaper and said Margaret Thatcher's prospectus would not bring about growth, and then it did. I suppose we can always prejudge these things before they go ahead, but certainly the way things are now, it does look like the Labour Party is in a very optimistic state. So optimistic, in fact, that last night quite a few members of the Shadow Cabinet had a bit of a sing-song at the Labour Party, at the Mirror newspaper's party. We've got a little clip of Shadow Health Secretary Wes Streeting singing Robbie Williams' Angels, but changing the lyrics slightly. Let's have a listen. I'm loving Starmer instead. Not the most imaginative lyric change, but perhaps reflective of the mood. Barry Gardner.
Well, look, I wasn't. I'm sad to say I was not there. I believe in getting an earlier bedtime than the Mirror Party, but I'd have loved to have seen it all. And I'm not a great Robbie Williams fan. I've probably just sort of knocked 1,000 people off my Twitter feed now from saying that I'm not a Robbie Williams fan. So I don't even know the original song. Sorry.
Well, Tony, you were there. And I suppose it was interesting. We do see often there was karaoke last year, but seeing Angela Rayner, seeing Wes Streeting, seeing Lisa Nandy, seeing John Ashworth, all getting up and singing, what does that say about the mood here?
Well, I suppose it suggests they were having a very good time. I was there, you're right, I was stood next to you. We watched it all.
Did you have a very good time, Dave?
I had a great time.
And did you sing?
I did, actually.
What did you sing, and what were the lyrics?
I did Hey Jude, which had about 12 minutes of
wonderful.
nah. You don't realise how many. You don't realise quite how many nahs there are. I have to say, the pages go round. It's the same thing over and over again.
When we were having this, when we were setting up this panel discussion, I did not expect we'd get singing from Barry Gardner live.
There we are.
I'm half expecting you to now whistle, which I know you can do very, very tunefully.
Not this morning.
But not this morning.
You do wonder, though, I suppose, Wes Streeting, widely been tipped as a future leader of the Labour Party, certainly someone who's likely to run in any leadership contest. He has been accused of briefing against the leader in the past, and now he goes up in front of the whole of the Labour Party conference. He says he's like
briefing against the leader.
Well, I don't know. Look, Barry, I don't want to.
You're just trying to sow dissent where there is none. This is outrageous, Tony.
You're all friends here.
Well, I suppose it does counteract rather this profile that appeared in the Sunday Times magazine over the weekend that sort of had Wes Streeting pictured and spoken about as if he was a future leader. He's speaking this morning.
Well, does that
as Shadow
explain
Health
why
Secretary.
he's been given the graveyard slot this morning at the end of conference when everybody's on the train? maybe that's it. You've got it, Tom. You've worked it out.
Perhaps we started this conversation saying there is great unity and harmony within the Labour Party, and we're ending this conversation with leadership speculation, with briefing notes, with saying that the leadership is working against Wes Streeting, that Wes Streeting is free. I mean,
Not at all.
Where have we got ourselves to? I suppose just in our final minute or so, we should bring up, I suppose, the one stain on this conference, which has been overall, I suppose, a success for the party, but during it, an MP has been suspended. Rupa Huq made some comments that now Sir Keir Starmer has himself termed as racist on Monday. They came out yesterday. Rupa Huq was suspended. Tony, can you talk us through this?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important thing to say is that the party clearly acted extremely quickly on this, and that hasn't always been the case. Certainly under the former Labour leader, you would often find that these investigations into things people had said took a long time. The whip wasn't suspended quickly. The party's really come down very hard on Rupa Huq for what she said in that fringe meeting. The thrust of what she said was that Kwasi Kwarteng couldn't really be black if he was a Conservative, was basically what she was saying, and the idea being, of course, that if you're not white, then you have to be left-wing. And the party has rightly said that those comments aren't acceptable, and they've suspended the whip from her pending an investigation. And of course, these things always have to go through a proper disciplinary process. But
and she has now apologised. Although initially she did say she stood by the comments, and there was an awkward 3 hours before that apology was forthcoming. Barry Gardner, do you think that Rupa Huq will be let back into the party? What would you like to see happen now through this process?
Look, I would never prejudge an inquiry. What I would say is that you should always attack the Conservative Party on its policies. You should never attack anybody on anything other than their policies. You should not personalise politics. It's possible actually to respect the person but disagree with their politics. And I think that's the only way that politicians should behave.
Well, Barry Gardner, Tony Diver, thank you so much for joining us on the briefing this morning. It's been a delight to have you, and I suppose, but maybe Tony more than Barry, get some sleep, and I hope you don't have to work far too late today. Thank you both. Well, of course, yesterday we saw Sir Keir Starmer give his speech to the Labour Party conference. Afterwards, I caught up with Meg Hillier to see what she made, the Labour MP, of course, and chair of the what's that committee called? The Public Accounts Committee. Thank you very much, Barry Gardner. Let's have a listen to what Meg made of the speech.
given us some really concrete things to tell people on the doorstep, really putting flesh on the bone of why a Labour government would be massively different to a Tory government. And if we didn't need, we needed a contrast, what happened on Friday in the House of Commons, I was there, ripping up all the fiscal rules, shattering the Tories' reputation for monetary responsibility, and we are now seeing what the alternative is here. And I think I'm really invigorated to get back out on my doorsteps and say to people, not just, I'm sorry, it's really difficult, but there is now a real alternative, voting Labour. Because nationalising the private industries would be hugely expensive and wouldn't deliver immediate change to the consumer. This is saying for all that new energy that's going to be created, and of course we don't have state aid issues now because we're not in Europe, we can set up something that's basically a co-op, owned by the people, for the people, and reducing energy bills. In my own constituency we've got smaller models of this in some of our estates, which is creating green, cheap energy for people, running their estates, and it's helped create jobs. So it's actually replicating what's being done out there by some of the best councils. So it's really a great idea, and it's one of the best ways of doing it fast, because we'll be getting on with it and doing it ourselves, and there's a real mission there.
Ending there talking about the Great British Energy proposal from Sir Keir Starmer, although I have to say that comparison to what some of these councils around the country have been doing with their own energy companies might come as a bit of a surprise to people who live in Bristol, after Bristol Council set up an energy firm that lost a lot of taxpayers' money and was shut down just a year or so ago. Well, I caught up with the Shadow Business Secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, also after that speech to get some more detail on what this Great British Energy proposal really means.
Well, he talked about a 97 moment, but also the spirit of Harold Wilson was there, the spirit of Clement Attlee was there as well. Look, around the world, from the Middle East to Scandinavia, there are state companies involved in maximising the opportunities from their own natural resources for the people of those countries. If those countries can do it, I think we can too. And I think some old-fashioned attitudes about what the relationship is between business and the state are not the way forward. Look, this country will miss out unless there is a government willing to use its powers to get the best of those opportunities for the British people, and that's what we're about.
There's a lot of confidence here at the Labour Party conference. Many people talking about the next election being in the bag, being a massive majority. Is complacency an issue?
There's no one here who has said that to me, and I've been around most of this conference. Look, when you have lost 4 elections in a row, you've been out of power for 12 years, you've lost an election on the scale of 2019, you don't get complacent because of that. And no one underestimates the Conservative Party. But I think what has surprised, well, everyone across the country is the way that Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss have torched what I would say has traditionally been the Conservatives' best brand, which is essentially a notion that they might not be very kind or fair, but they're competent and you can trust them. That went up on Friday in the same way it went down on Black Wednesday. And frankly, what it means for everyone in this country, they're poorer today and they can see that. And I'm afraid, looking to the future, what it means for mortgages and interest rates and inflation, there is a lot to worry about, and people want us to be the people who can give them some hope for the future.
Did Keir Starmer's speech today and Rachel Reeves' speech yesterday, did they really give the confidence that Labour would be more sound on finances? There were lots of extra spending commitments in those speeches, and indeed, of course, Labour committing to a similar style energy bailout package as the Conservatives, not entirely funded by that windfall tax. There'd be a lot of borrowing under Labour too.
Only to invest, and that's the message. I mean, in the last interview I did, someone just asking me, why won't you borrow more for public services? Well, we won't borrow more, because when you do that for day-to-day spending, you get the kind of reaction, and actually the whole philosophy of this government has lost the confidence of those financial markets. People know in this country you can't be a politician who promises to cut taxes, spend more money, and somehow magically that will pay for itself. I mean, that is the position of the Liz Truss government, and you've seen what it means once you lose that hard-earned credibility. And let's be clear, the UK is an established major economy. You have to be going some to get the kind of negative reaction that Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss got on Friday, and it's absolutely to the detriment of everybody. So no, we're for sound money, and Rachel's background versus Kwasi's and Keir's versus Liz Truss, I think their personalities as well as their CVs are what people will take, and they've got more faith in them than the government.
So that's a firm commitment, no borrowing for day-to-day spending at all. That's a pretty hard bar to meet, given the extraordinary economic times we're in and the scale of energy package, for example, that's required.
Well, look, the reason you've got fiscal rules and the reason you have transparency in your public finances around things like letting the OBR, the Office of Budget Responsibility, look at budgets, and also the reason, by the way, why you don't sack the senior civil servant at the Treasury in order to scapegoat him for the government's own failings, is that all these things, they raise the risk premium of the UK as a state, and that means it costs us more money to borrow. It means, well, he talked about a 97 moment, but also the spirit of Harold Wilson was there, the spirit of Clement Attlee was there as well. Look around the world, from the Middle East to Scandinavia, there are state companies involved in maximising the opportunities from their own natural resources for the people of those countries. If those countries can do it, I think we can too. And I think some old-fashioned attitudes about what the relationship is between business and the state are not the way forward. Look, this country will miss out unless there is a government willing to use its powers to get the best of those opportunities for the British people, and that's what we're about.
There's a lot of confidence here at the Labour Party conference. Many people talking about the next election being in the bag, being a massive majority. Is complacency an issue?
There's no one here who has said that to me, and I've been around most of this conference. Look, when you have lost 4 elections in a row, you've been out of power for 12 years, you've lost an election on the scale of 2019, you don't get complacent because of that. And no one underestimates the Conservative Party. But I think what has surprised, well, everyone across the country is the way that Kwasi Kwarteng and Liz Truss have torched what I would say has traditionally been the Conservatives' best brand, which is essentially a notion that they might not be very kind or fair, but they're competent and you can trust them. That went up on Friday in the same way it went down on Black Wednesday. And frankly, what it means for everyone in this country, that they're poorer today and they can see that. And I'm afraid, looking to the future, what it means for mortgages and interest rates and inflation, there is a lot to worry about, and people want us to be the people who can give them some hope for the future.
Did Keir Starmer's speech today and Rachel Reeves' speech yesterday, did they really give the confidence that Labour would be more sound on finances? There were lots of extra spending commitments in those speeches, and indeed, of course, Labour committing to a similar style energy bailout package as the Conservatives, not entirely funded by that windfall tax. There'd be a lot of borrowing under Labour too.
Only to invest, and that's the message. I mean, in the last interview I did, someone just asking me, why won't you borrow more for public services? Well, we won't borrow more, because when you do that for day-to-day spending, you get the kind of reaction, and actually the whole philosophy of this government has lost the confidence of those financial markets. People know in this country you can't be a politician who promises to cut taxes, spend more money, and somehow magically that will pay for itself. I mean, that is the position of the Liz Truss government, and you've seen what it means once you lose that hard-earned credibility. And let's be clear.
Well, a little bit more of Jonathan Reynolds there than we thought we'd bargained for. Sorry if he repeated himself a little bit in that interview. That's our fault, not his. Well, now, moving on, we did mention with Jonathan Reynolds a little bit about one of the other policy announcements in Sir Keir Starmer's big speech yesterday. It wasn't just about energy, it wasn't just about health, but he did mention one of the biggest issues for many people around this country: housing. The Labour Party now has a target to get owner occupation up to 70%. How is it going to do it? Well, I'm delighted to be joined by Freddie Poser, the director of the Priced Out campaign. And Freddie, were you surprised to hear Starmer talking about housing, given how contentious it can be as an issue in our politics?
Well, I wasn't really surprised by what he said, but that's because everyone can sort of agree on where we want to get to. We want 70% owner occupation perhaps, or we want to see prices come down and people be able to genuinely afford a home. I think everyone can agree on that, and that's not very contentious. What we didn't really hear from Starmer is how's he going to do it? What are we actually going to see from a Labour government that's going to boost home ownership rates, it's going to build building rates?
Now, Starmer mentioned briefly in his speech something about land banking, which some people may know about, some other little tweaks, and building council housing, I suppose, social housing, affordable housing. Is that enough?
So land banking isn't relevant particularly. We've looked at that, both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party have looked at this and found that, it's a bit of an issue on the margins. We can make it better, but actually that's not going to deliver the new homes we need. More council housing, that's obviously more places for people to live, but given Labour's traditional aversion to right to buy, I'm not sure how that's going to help them with their aim to get more people owning their own home. Really what we need to see is planning reform. We need to see it make it easier for people to build more homes, and that's going to include the private sector building more homes. It can't just be the state sector.
That's an interesting proposal because, of course, the Labour Party has said in a very vague sense that planning reform will be necessary. What are the specifics here in terms of what needs to be done?
Well, you're absolutely right. The devil is in the detail on this. It was good to see them commit to a bit of planning reform, but that needs to be reform that makes it easier to build. So we might need to look at the green belt. That doesn't necessarily mean even shrinking the green belt. There are good proposals that would allow us to build on some green belt land whilst protecting far more. We need to look at building in cities. Labour councils are pretty good actually at densifying and building in cities, so more regeneration of estates, adding houses, making it a bit denser, more affordable to live in, and better for the environment. And other policies that would allow councils to say yes to more development and say no to NIMBYs a bit more.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned NIMBYs because, of course, there's been a bit of fun around this party conference. Of course, you've got a stall here as priced out, and you've made some merchandise that you've been giving out to Labour Party members.
Absolutely, I've got one here for you. We've got our Never Kissed a NIMBY T-shirt, which is just a bit of fun, a play on the classic LGBT Labour, but Never Kissed a Tory. But we think actually a bit more playful, and I thought I'd give you one of the T-shirts for you to take home.
Well,
Never Kissed a NIMBY.
I'm absolutely honoured. I will wear this with pride. Never Kissed a NIMBY. Now, for those of you who don't know what the NIMBYs are, Freddie, if you could explain it in just 30 seconds or so.
A NIMBY stands for Not in My Backyard. It's someone who sort of is pro-housing in theory, but when it comes to a specific development, they go, oh, not that one, not near me. So what we're trying to get the message across is if you want to see these home ownership rates come up, we've got to start building more homes, and some of that's going to be near people who already live there, and that's actually a good thing. More neighbours, better time, better communities.
Wow, well, what a note to end on. And just finally, if someone wants to get their hands on their very own Never Kissed a NIMBY T-shirt, where can they find one?
Take a look at pricedown.org.uk. We're going to be selling them very soon.
Cracking. Well, Freddie Poser, thank you so much for joining us here, and indeed for closing the briefing shows that we've had here at the Labour Party conference. I'll be back from 9:30 on Monday morning at the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham, so don't miss that. But there's still a bit of a day of Labour Party conference to go here. The Shadow Health Secretary, Wes Streeting, will be speaking. It will be interesting to see if he's got a bit of a croaky voice after that karaoke last night. Stick with us on GB News and don't miss a moment of it. Up next, it's To The Point.
Hello, a very good morning to you. I'm Aidan McGibbon from the Met Office. A bright and breezy day for many of us. Further scattered showers to come, especially around eastern and western coasts. But in between the showers, there will be some sunshine. The more prolonged rain that we saw yesterday in the southwest, now pushing away. These weather fronts responsible for that. And low pressure still close by. I suppose a bit more spaced out, so the wind not quite as brisk, but it is still